Hello, hello, beautiful listener. My name is AP Mobley, and I'm your host here at the Myths and Folktales and Fairy Tales podcast. I'm also the author of dark fantasy inspired by mythology, so if you ever wanted to check out my books, I'd really appreciate it. All right, this is an episode I've been looking forward to making ever since I decided to start this podcast. And it's because the story I'm talking about today inspired my all time favorite movie, Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. I saw Corpse Bride in theaters when it came out. I remember I was in the fourth grade, and I had to beg my mom to let me see it because she thought it would be way too scary. But after nagging her for weeks and weeks, she caved in, and I've never been the same. I wish I was exaggerating when I say that Corpse Bride is like a quarter of my entire personality. I'm not kidding. Once that bad boy came out on DVD and my mom bought it discounted at Hastings, I watched it at least once a week. If the apocalypse went down right now and I could only pick one movie to watch for the rest of my life, I'd pick Corpse Bride over literally everything else. I've dressed up as Emily for Halloween multiple times in my life, as a child and an adult. And when I got married, I used the wedding vows from the movie as my own wedding vows. So, yes, Corpse Bride became my very favorite thing when it was released in theaters in 2005. And several years after that, as I was browsing the internet for AMVs and fan art of it, I stumbled across a creator on DeviantArt who explained in some of their Corpse Bride posts that the film was actually inspired by a Jewish folktale called The Finger. Of course, after seeing the posts, I was hell bent on finding and reading the original folktale, and I eventually tracked it down on Tumblr. Then, several more years later, when I was old enough to work and make my own money and buy my own stuff, I stumbled across a whole book of Jewish folktales on Amazon that had been selected and retold by Howard Schwartz. I was totally overjoyed to see that the collection did in fact include The Finger, and I purchased it immediately so that I could have the folktale that inspired Corpse Bride in my personal library, and also so that I could read the other folktales in the book. The collection is called Lilith's Cave, Jewish Tales of the Supernatural, and if you can get your hands on it, I highly recommend doing so and giving it a read. I'll link it in the description of this episode in case you're interested. At any rate, I don't think I need to further explain why this folktale is part of the stories that shaped me section of the podcast. But before I actually tell you the story, I want to briefly cover the history of it and why it likely came to be. Sadly, back in the day, some anti-Semites would attack Jewish wedding parties and murder the bride. The Finger presumably stars one of those murdered Jewish brides. With all of that said, let's get into the story of The Finger. Our tale begins long ago, on a clear, crisp night, as a young man is traveling through the forest with his friends. He's on his way to a neighboring village, where he's supposed to marry the beautiful daughter of a wealthy merchant the next day. As the young man and his friends are traversing the woods, laughing all the while, they stumble upon a twig jutting out of the soil. The branch is roughly the same size and shape of a finger, and the friends start to joke among themselves about who would put a wedding ring on the finger. Of course, the young man who's supposed to get married the next day insists that he must be the one to put a wedding ring on the twig, because he's going to be the first among his friends to marry. And so he does just that. He puts his bride's ring on the branch, and he recites his wedding vows 3 times, as the old law requires. To the young man's horror, the finger starts to twitch, then rises up out of the earth. As it does so, the young man realizes that it's much more than just a finger-shaped twig. It's a real human finger attached to a real human hand. The hand claws at the soil, as if the person it belongs to is trying to pull themselves out of their shallow grave, and soon a dead woman, shrouded in a decaying wedding dress, vaults out of the muck. Right away, the dead woman in the tattered wedding dress begins to call the young man her husband, and she demands that they consummate their marriage immediately. Understandably terrified, The young man and his friends dash pell-mell toward the neighboring village, where, I'll remind you, the young man is supposed to get married at the next day. Once they reach the village and determine that they've escaped the dead woman, they swear to never speak of what transpired that night. As fate would have it, though, the young man and his friends didn't really escape the corpse. The next day, during his wedding ceremony, she shows up to stop it. She claims that the young man can't marry someone else because he's already married to her. Again, the dead woman demands that the marriage be consummated. And when the true bride asks the young man whether he's really married to the dead woman, the corpse flaunts the wedding ring which he'd placed on her finger. The rabbi conducting the ceremony asks the young man if there were witnesses to the marriage. Because the young man's friends saw it, the answer is yes. However, the union feels unnatural to everyone, so the rabbi tells the young man, the corpse, and the true bride that he needs to consult with a group of other rabbis before deciding whether the marriage is legitimate. In the end, the group of rabbis decide that although the young man's marriage to the corpse is legitimate, the dead have no claim on the living, and so the young man is free to not consummate the marriage and to marry his true bride. Heartbroken, the corpse falls to the ground in a lifeless heap of decomposing flesh and bones. The young man and his true bride marry, and they make sure to give the dead woman a proper burial and pass on her story to their children. Before I go, I thought I'd let you know that if you're interested in reading my newsletter exclusive novella, Wrath of Persephone, the link to download the ebook is in this episode's description. If you want more myths, folktales, and fairy tales, I've also included the link to my myths, folktales, and fairy tales blog in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next story that shaped me, the Greek myth of Perseus and Andromeda. I'll see you next time.